You're listening to a Frequency Podcast Network production.
He's in the building!
Drink the moment. Drink it.
I said empty your mind.
Coquettish and coy. Ow. Ow.
What?
Yeah, there's people that are dying.
The wickedly talented.
More than great. It was historic.
Crack is
Whoa.
Oh, good for you.
I have to apologize.
One of the hottest.
Hello, and welcome back to The Reheat, a podcast that re-examines the hottest celebrity news and scandals of yesteryear and asks, how would we react to the same events if they'd transpired today? I'm your co-host, Sarah Sahagian.
And I'm Sadaf. And this week, we are going to tackle what I like to call the first family of the United States. And if you haven't run off and discussed just yet, I'll tell you why the Kardashians have shaped pop culture for the last decade. In bad ways, absolutely, but also great ways we don't talk about enough because the media has long decided that they are nothing more than airheaded fame whores. Whereas Sarah and I believe they deserve a reassessment for their business acumen, their cultural pride, and so much more. And yes, that means we're taking it all the way back to the beginning when Kim Kardashian in February 2007 blew up after her 2002 sex tape with then boyfriend Ray J, brother of Brandy. Sorry, Brandy. And it was, needless to say, the sex tape that launched 1,000 careers. Sarah, have you watched that sex tape?
I am ashamed to admit this, but yes, in undergrad, I attended a party where somebody got the idea that we should do it. We'd all been drinking. Absolutely, at this point in my life, having had the cultural conversations we've had, I do not believe anyone should ever watch revenge porn, which is essentially what this was. But I have seen snippets of the sex tape. It's so awkward to watch sex tapes because they're a different beast from pornography, right? Like they're not choreographed. They're not meant to be viewed by the public. So it's such an awkward thing to watch. And I went into the other room after a while because even though I couldn't articulate exactly why at the time, and because I'd had some vodka, I will admit, it felt gross to watch this and it felt like kind of a violation.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you were under the influence when you saw it because I have no excuse. Now, mind you, I have not seen the whole thing. I've only seen snippets. And oddly, I have heard more audio than I've seen video. It's just a very uncomfortable experience, is what I will say. And also, it's only just one of the many sex tapes in Hollywood that led to a full-blown career. We know Paris Hilton, who was a good friend of Kim's, had one of her own. We know Rob Lowe had one of his own, and that's something we'll explore in an episode later on. But what's interesting is that the porn company, Vivid Entertainment, began selling that tape. And Kim sued the company and then dropped her suit and settled for what was a reported $5 million. Not enough, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
And that means Vivid continued to sell the tape to a lot of people and that the family was quickly accused of using it as a publicity stunt. Because 8 months later, they released their reality show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, on E! And that led to endless spin-offs and only came to a close with its 20th season this past March. That is longevity. It's also what propelled them into a level of fame over the years that I don't think is comparable to any other family in entertainment in the last decade. Now, the devil works hard, but Ryan Seacrest works harder, and it's him who we can thank, as he produced the show and even came up with the idea of giving the Kardashians a platform. This is also the series that helped turn reality TV into what is today a juggernaut, releasing around the same time as MTV's Laguna Beach and Bravo's Real Housewives. It was the much more modern Brady Bunch, and to be honest, I loved it. I've watched all 20 seasons, and I could still use more. And to recap, it isn't all about Kim. We also have Kourtney, Khloe, Rob, Kendall, Kylie, and then there's Kris and Caitlyn, and of course, Lord Disick. Scott Disick, the father of Kourtney's kids, and all the messy little love interests and best friends in between. Here's how Kim explained the sex tape in relation to her career when asked about it by Oprah in 2012.
Would you be where you are had there not been a sex tape?
I think that's how I was definitely introduced to the world. So I'd like to think that I'm aware. I'm not naive to that fact that that's pretty much how I was introduced to the world. It was a negative way. So I felt Like I really had to work 10 times harder to get people to see the real me.
Did you feel betrayed by it?
I felt humiliated. I felt like...
You know there are people who say that you put it out yourself. You know that.
Yeah. And, you know, I think why would anyone put that humiliation on their family like that?
Because what were you worried about most, yourself or your family?
My family.
So, Sarah, have you ever been a fan of the show? What is your relation to it?
So I have some very fond memories of this show. I am part Armenian. I have an Armenian last name, Sehegian. I don't actually pronounce it correctly because I never learned how to speak Armenian. But I do have some Armenian heritage. I have Armenian relatives. And so I was really excited to see people who reflected an ethnicity I shared on TV. We had a bizarrely similar background. I believe the girls attended all girls schools. So did my sister and I. My father was an Armenian lawyer. Their father was an Armenian lawyer. I mean, my father didn't represent O.J. Simpson. And also they were much wealthier than my family, who was admittedly like, you know, upper middle class and very comfortable, but they were at the next level. Still, I actually, in some ways, even though my lifestyle has always been very different and I've always done different things with my life, could relate. And it was nice to see people on TV talking about things like going for laser hair removal. There is this stereotype that Armenian girls have a lot of body hair, and I've never seen studies about that, but I personally do have a lot of body hair, and so do many of my female relatives. And so laser hair removal, which was something that we all did and kind of felt this secret shame about, was really normalized by the episode where Courtney and Chloe and Kim go and get laser hair removal together, and they just talk about it openly like it's a normal thing to do, like going for a facial or a manicure. So I found the show in many ways a really welcome form of representation. Most of the Armenian people I'd previously seen on TV were portrayed as mobsters, and I couldn't relate to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Kardashians makes a lot more sense, and I love your connection with it. But do you feel that because it started with the sex tape, it was tainted a little?
I think for many years, people just assumed the show was pure trash because there's such a stigma associated with sex work. And while Kim wasn't engaging in sex work when she did that tape because she wasn't consensually making something for public consumption, she did take money for it after the fact. And then a lot of people looked down on her for it. We absolutely shouldn't look down on sex workers or even people who don't intend to do sex work, but take money for a sex tape and a settlement. Like, what people didn't really appreciate is settling and taking $5 million doesn't mean you're not pissed off and doesn't mean you don't feel violated.
Exactly.
It means you don't want to engage in protracted litigation. And as the child of a high-profile lawyer, she would have known how terrible lawsuits are. I mean, in my family, lots of people are lawyers, and they'll always tell you, if you can avoid going to court, it's probably better for your mental health not to go to court.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people are watching a tape of me having sex, I better be making money off of it. Sorry, that's how I feel about it. So, you know, it is interesting because then you made a note of this yourself, Sarah, but the show was so popular. It did really, really well in the ratings, even until recently. But it's always been written off as trash. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way reality TV is painted in the media as light, feminized garbage. It's sort of like the TV version of a beach read. And I think that's far from the truth. We've had moments of true authenticity on this show, and some of the greatest episodes of television in the last decade have come from the Real Housewives. I'm not kidding. Granted, Keeping Up with the Kardashians grew stale toward the end and overproduced, but for the most part, it connected with a lot of people. Maybe it's the Nickelback of reality shows. You know, we always hate it, but somebody's watching, somebody's loving it, and it's a lot of people. For me, the show encapsulated what it means to be a close family and to have such a close and tight sisterhood. I would watch this with my sister every week. We still talk about Kardashians drama, even though we no longer live together, and we don't watch the show all of the time. It's our connective thread. She's a Kim, I'm a Chloe, all of that shit. And please don't judge me. There is no Tristan Thompson in my life. I do not allow Brampton gentlemen near me, ever. Now, say what you will about their choices in life and how they got where they did, but for me, this was family viewing. My mom even still asks me how how Kourtney is doing. And, it's as if they're our next door neighbors and we grew up with them. And it's very rare to see depictions of sibling love on television, though I do highly recommend Casual, which is now on Crave. And, this show really nailed it. All the ups and downs. My younger brother was even a bit of a Rob, and he grew up being surrounded by women all of his life the same way he did. And it was the same way my sister and I would have a drag out fight, and the next day we'd be best friends calling each other bitches. It's forgotten by the next day. That's sisterhood. And I think this show really nailed it. Here is my favorite and possibly the most iconic clip from the show that captures the sisters best. It's just after Chris Humphries throws Kim in the water. Take a listen.
Oh my God, I'm gonna cry. My diamond earring.
Hold on.
Seriously. It's not funny.
Are you serious?
Literally, that's $75,000.
Hold on. We'll find it, baby.
We're not gonna find it in the ocean. Oh, what happened? My diamond earring fell out. I had my diamond earrings in and one of them came out.
Oh my God. All right, so you take this one out. Show me where. Just show
In
me
the
where.
ocean. I'm not gonna find a. What's wrong with you guys? My diamond earring came up in the ocean and it's gone. Kim, there's people that are dying.
Iconic. That was Kourtney, by the way, at the end. That is me and my sister in every possible way. And again, I'm so sorry to her, but yes, she is a Kim. Now, Sarah, how do you feel the family has been characterized throughout the show and throughout the Ascent?
So, they very much play up the image of this ridiculous, over-the-top family. They play into the idea that they are spoiled and super wealthy, right? Like, Kim can poke fun at herself in many ways, and so can the others. And they understood that part of what we were watching was we were there to watch people do ridiculous things. So it's obviously, if the show became manufactured and heightened and more almost a parody of itself, it's very postmodern in many ways, right? They're interacting with the audience and changing the show based on, I guess, what people are saying on Instagram or Twitter. But this scene where she can't find her earring, I want to defend Kim here. Okay.
Okay, go for it. Someone needs to.
If you have earrings where the combined price is $150,000 and you are not intending to go into the water, you're just wearing them and going about your day. Kim is an entrepreneur. In addition to being a reality star, that lady hustles, and she bought those for herself. She absolutely has the right to be upset if someone throws her into the ocean, a place she did not intend to go, and she loses one. I think a lot of us, especially left-leaning people like me, like to flatter ourselves about how altruistic we would be if we ever became really rich. But I feel like the temptation to buy super expensive earrings and to really care about them if you can afford them is there. And I would defy anybody to become a diamond monster like Kim. I think many of us would do the same thing.
I think 100%. Are you kidding me? And I would drown Chris Humphries in the ocean after. Those are more valuable. Okay, now let's dive into a little bit of how this family has long been characterized by the rest of the world. Trashy, vapid socialites. Really something only women tend to get stamped with in Hollywood. But let's be real, Kim was a socialite for a while there. These siblings were born wealthy and in the public eye as the children of Chris and Robert Sr., who, as Sarah noted before, was best known for being close friends with O.J. Simpson. O.J. was even the best man at Robert and Chris's wedding in 1978. And after the 1994 murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, as we know, Robert defended OJ. OJ even hid out at the Kardashian house. That's how close they were. It was especially interesting because Chris was close friends with Nicole. That's a fun little drama you can look up later. But the reason I note this moment in history is because it cemented the Kardashian name in Hollywood. People knew Robert because of the OJ trial, and therefore they knew Chris, who was a socialite herself at this point. She and Robert would go on to divorce in 1991, and he would sadly pass away from cancer in 2003. But she remarried Olympian Caitlyn Jenner in 1976. These two would have children, Kendall and Kylie, and gain a horde of step-siblings through Caitlyn's previous relationships, and that would include Bert, Brandon, and Brody Jenner, who became reality stars of their own, and who were also themselves stepchildren to music producer David Foster and his endless children. So a lot of these families were all connected. It's a hell of a lineage. Needless to say, if you look through the Kardashian family tree, it is so deeply entwined in famous names and faces. There was no way this family was never going to end up famous itself. It was very much written in the stars and the tabloids. They were ready for it. And who is the one who builds socialites? The tabloids. It doesn't stop there. As she grew up, Kim was very good friends with Paris Hilton, as we noted before, and even worked for her as a stylist and organizer, believe it or not. If you even look back at some of the old paparazzi shots of Paris leaving Kitson or Nobu, you will see a very young Kim in the background, sort of trailing behind. Sarah, what do you make of the way this family had roots and notoriety?
Well, I think that in order to end up on reality TV, you have to be on the radar of TV executives or producers. The sex tape is also a piece of it. But it honestly really begins in the 90s when they become their family. Their father becomes part of the first ever reality show, which was the O.J. Simpson trial. I don't know if you remember The People versus O.J. Simpson, Ryan Murphy's amazing dramatization.
Oh, of course. We highly recommend.
One of my favorite shows of all time. But they do that little scene that, I'm sure is an embellishment. I have no idea if this actually happened, where the kids are watching the chase and the reporters are referring to their father because he's a part of this. OJ had been, holed up in his home, and they don't know how to pronounce Robert Kardashian's name because no one knows how to pronounce Armenian last names. I'm Armenian, I know that. And then the kids start yelling at the TV how to spell their name. And they're loving the fame, but they're also starting to respond to the reporters and think about how to craft their image. No, this is how you spell it. This is how you say it, right?
Yes.
It's amazing. You can see them. It's a formative moment where they're becoming aware of the fame monster and aware that being associated with other people who are famous, even really awful, unsavory people, can make you famous. And there are tons of possibilities when you are famous. So, I would say watch Ryan Murphy's show about the O.J. Simpson trial. It's fantastic. Everyone needs to see it. But I also call it, my nickname for it is Kardashian Batman Begins, because it's their origin story.
Yes, it totally is. And yeah, I highly recommend it as well. And you know what, to add to your great point is that Hollywood has always loved its famous families. You have the Smiths, the Baldwins, the Fondas, the Coppolas. There's always a family that goes back generations and holds onto that spotlight for years and years. And I think the Kardashians is a really good example of that. They might not be on our screens in the same way, but they really do hold that attention in the same way, I think. Now, everything, of course, in this family's lives took a massive turn post-sex tape. Suddenly, it was Kim's name that was everywhere as Paris's began to fade out. Kim was also everywhere. Dancing with the Stars, America's Next Top Model, How I Met Your Mother, 90210. She was in every magazine, every red carpet, so many commercials. One in particular, I don't know if you remember it, Sarah, but for Carl's Jr., which I'm sure many thirsty of you will remember, but it involved her eating a very juicy salad while in bed.
And while the best things in life are messy, it's fun to get clean.
Who said salads can't be hot? The new cranberry apple walnut grilled chicken salad. One of 3 new premium salads at Carl's Jr.
I did not know that a salad could drip that much. Let's just say that. But this is when the endorsement deals began to pile up, and the family was still running their California fashion boutique as well, which was called Dash. So she especially was hounded by paparazzi everywhere she went. If anything, it seemed like the world wanted more Kim. The world wanted more Kardashians, and so did the media, which is pivotal in keeping her in the spotlight, even when all she really had going on was the guest spot on CSI. Sir, what do you make of the way she specifically climbed through Hollywood? Because there was clearly an undeniable hunger for her.
I think people were curious at first because, I remember when I told my father about the Kardashians, he was so confused. He was like, the O.J. Simpson lawyer, his children have a show. So that is a hook for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But they're also all so traditionally attractive.
Yes.
But also, they're traditionally attractive, but also, society likes to exoticize anyone who doesn't have blonde hair and blue eyes, and they didn't. They had this ethnically ambiguous appeal. Hollywood loves to fetishize people who are racialized, and Hollywood also specifically loves racially ambiguous people. That's something people who are, kind of have many of the aspects of what's considered traditional white beauty, but just look slightly different from the Paris Hiltons of the world. So I think that people just liked the way they photographed and liked how zany they were and liked their lineage. And the sex tape was a salacious angle. Like, it was lightning in a bottle. The alchemy of the Kardashians is fascinating. I think they're a once in a generation dynasty. I don't think you can set out to create the new Kardashians, because what made them so compelling was A, they were unique, and B, that the stars seemed to align for them in a weird way. Like, these people clearly wanted to be famous, but they also got, depending on your perspective, unlucky or lucky, and had a lot of just life events that made them compelling. I mean, Kim is an extraordinarily resilient person who turned the sex tape, which was traumatic for her, into a story of resilience, I would say. I mean, on Oprah, she does admit, like, she's not naive. She knows that that's how she was introduced, but also she took that opportunity to become infamous and took the infamy and then worked hard, hustled, had a show that was fun and about sisterhood, and created perfumes and shoes and, nail shapewear. And she went from infamous to legitimately famous. And very few people can navigate that transition, because there are probably people today, like kids today, 13, 14-year-olds, who love Kim Kardashian and don't even necessarily know she did a sex tape.
Yes. Amen. And the only thing that I will add to that is, this was the 00s when she came up, and that was a period where the tabloids lived for socialites. So we had her, we had Paris, we had Nicole Richie, there was Tara Reid, Lindsay Lohan. And I think Kim stands apart because, as you said, she used all of that and she turned it into an empire that's long lasting and I think will be going on for quite some time. That's impressive. Now, Kim was also growing notoriety this whole time for her love of getting married. Don't we all just love to get married? Don't we love to collect husbands? Now, it wasn't in an entirely positive way, because she was first married to music producer Damon Thomas when she was only 19 in 2000, which is not something a lot of people know. And she said they split because of the physical and emotional abuse. She later married NBA player Chris Humphries in 2011. What an incredible, boring relationship. That's all I have to say about that. She even released a 2-part wedding special on E!, our Lord and Savior, but the Humphries union only lasted an infamous 72 days before she filed for divorce.
You know when you just have that feeling when you're like, he's the one? Once we moved in, I knew that he was not the one.
Many called it a publicity stunt to garner more attention, and there was even a petition demanding all Kardashians' content be erased from the planet in protest. And when we look at that now, isn't it kind of crazy that so many were so angry that she had a short-lived marriage? I mean, come on, take a beat. Now, in the recent Keeping Up reunion, Kim said she felt pressured to go ahead with the wedding because it was being televised and had become such a massive media event. Needless to say, Kim, the person, became a very different entity from Kim, the celebrity, and how the world might respond impacted her decisions, down to who she even married. Meanwhile, older sister Kourtney also made the press constantly for her on-again, off-again relationship with Scott, as did Khloe for her ill-fated relationship with Lamar Odom and later Tristan, which continuously hit the rocks each time TMZ would catch him cheating on her. Now, Sarah, there's no doubt how this might have turned the public against Kim and made her a little bit of a joke. Do you think the response that she got was deserved, though? I mean, what was the feedback that she and her sisters should have gotten?
So when I found out about this divorce, this is literally where I was. I was teaching my tutorial. I was in graduate school. I had 25 undergraduates, and I was going to let them go early. And then the news came up on my phone. I got a text about it from a friend. And then I told them, hey guys, I was going to let you go early, but you need to stay for an extra 5 minutes to discuss this with me because I need people to talk about this divorce.
See, that's why I thought they got off early, because of this news. We all deserved a day off.
No, I wanted people to discuss it with, and I knew they watched the show. I knew they watched it. I was like, so we're going to do a class discussion. To be fair, we were talking about popular culture. It was a gender studies course, but popular culture came up a lot. So it was relevant to the curriculum. I wasn't just abusing my power entirely.
Oh no, abuse away. I approve of this.
Anyway, I think that we as a society really scapegoated her for this because marriages have two people in them. Okay. So a divorce is typically not just on one person. Chris
Mhm.
Humphries, from the sounds of it, from what she said, as soon as they got married, kind of disregarded the person she was and the person she introduced herself as, and just assumed she'd become a homemaker and would devote herself to helping with his career and being there for him and being a wife and mother. And he would say derogatory things to her, saying like, a year or so, no one's going to care about you, which a lot of cynical people thought was true. They thought he was being the voice of reason, but he was wrong because he underestimated Kim. Kim created an empire, and she needed a partner who believed in her. He didn't. Now that we know what she was capable of, the kind of longevity that she was capable of, I absolutely, if I were her, would have dumped him and just said, listen, I was sold a damaged bill of goods. I thought you were going to be a supportive husband. I didn't lie about how ambitious I was. And now you're just belittling everything I've achieved and everything I want to achieve. So I defend her. Also, it's no one's business. It doesn't hurt anyone else if she gets divorced. If you watched the wedding special and you enjoyed the opulence, you enjoyed her dress, you enjoyed all the fun moments, you got your entertainment, they don't owe you a long-lasting marriage. Like, people watch The Bachelor, and those proposals almost never lead to a marriage,
Yes.
okay? This is a staple of American entertainment, the fake marriage or the fake proposal, okay? This is not just Kim. Kim did not invent this, and Kim will not be the last person to do it.
And by the way, we should be thankful we got 72 days, okay? That's pretty damn good, considering they weren't really a great fit, and she kind of knew it. And yeah, you're right. Relationships in real life sometimes don't even get that far. And I think that's something that we forget. But I think what's also really interesting about this entire event is that it showed just how much tabloids can become pivotal enough to make the news rather than just break the news. They were sort of the third wheel in this relationship. And it reminds me of our Ben and Jen episode, who were also really feeling that pressure just from the media and from their fans to kind of keep it together and make it work. And it's what ultimately drove them apart. And I think it's what ultimately drove these two apart. And I think it's also interesting, in the case of Chloe, for example, who
Mm-hmm.
is forced to make decisions about her relationship each time with Tristan when the media is the one who catches him cheating.
Mm-hmm.
And then the headlines read, "What's Chloe gonna do?" And it's like, yeah, I'm also curious, what is Chloe gonna do? We need these tabloids to work on her and leave this man. And I mean, that's also kind of falling into the game of it all. But I do find it really interesting how, at least for a family that started as socialites, the tabloids are very much a part of the family. It's how the whole thing works. It's a whole machine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can't talk Kardashians without also discussing the way they've defined beauty standards over the years. But before we dig into that whole mess, let's take a quick break. Now, since the 72-day marriage, a decade has passed, in case you want to feel old. And in that time, the Kardashians' fame has multiplied, but so have the many controversies they've been embroiled in. Because when it comes to their many endorsements, some of those include countless diet products, from tummy teas to lollipops to waist trainers.
All right, guys, so I am going to explain to you why I use a waist trainer. Every once in a while when I'm just feeling like I need to get it together, and especially after I had babies, I would wear this just around the house.
Which, by the way, can actually shift your organs, so please think twice before you buy those. Sorry, Kim. And this happened all while the women sought out countless cosmetic procedures to enhance their bodies. The issue here is an undeniable one. This is a family that has perpetuated unattainable beauty standards. Literally, they had to buy their bodies, and yet they've profited off of these same standards they've created, telling their own fans, many of whom are young and impressionable, that they can look like them if they just drink this tea or eat this pill. It's all a lie and something the family has never really addressed. The worst part of it is they're suffering themselves. You've got Kylie Jenner, who grew up in front of a camera with sisters who look like glamazons. She got lip injections in her teens. She then profited off of that with her best-selling beauty brand, Kylie Cosmetics. Then you've got Chloe, who has always been the taller, bigger one of the women, and therefore different, to the point that she's even been hounded by rumors that her father isn't actually Robert Sr. So she's faced her own body image issues in front of the world. She regularly shares Photoshop selfies to Instagram, which end up trending the next day, calling her out. And even her young daughter is sometimes airbrushed in these photos. In a post earlier this summer, Khloe wrote, quote, "You never quite get used to being judged and pulled apart and told how unattractive one is. But I will say, if you hear anything enough, that you will start to believe it. This is how I've been conditioned to feel, that I'm not beautiful enough just being me," end quote. She went on to say that she's used the criticism to, quote, "get myself in the best shape of my life, but not without people wondering if she paid for it all." That makes you wonder, why not just pull yourself out of the whole machine? She is, of course, not immune to beauty standards herself, but she also had her own workout reality series called Revenge Body, of all things. Sarah, what do you make of the way the Kardashians have become victims of their own brand?
This is a very complicated issue because they are right. They're subjected to a huge amount of scrutiny. I mean, the media loves to take famous women and tear them apart and criticize every aspect of their bodies and their appearance. I understand that they probably internalized a lot of that misogyny. They internalized a lot of that fat phobia, but then they profited off of it too, right? Like shows like Revenge Bodies, or they sell you cosmetics and they sell you appetite suppressants. So I believe that they have suffered by being subjected to so much scrutiny and judgment, but also they're making so much money off of it. However, it is one of those cases where both things can be true. You can be a victim of beauty standards while perpetuating them and profiting off of them, right? Like the media is complicated. And if we want to develop media literacy, we have to have a worldview where we don't see things in black and white. And we realize that, you know, people can be suffering in the same way that you and I are suffering from beauty standards that, I mean, I don't want to speak for you.
Oh, you're correct.
The same way that I am suffering from beauty standards, but they can still also decide to react to that suffering in a way that hurts more people.
I have some empathy for them because I agree with you. Both things can be true. But it's also difficult to see that they know that they have such a big fan base. And if that means letting go of just one damn endorsement, I mean, who sucks on a lollipop to drop calories anyway? Like, let's make that happen. I don't think it would be so difficult. And, you know, one of the most unfortunate parts of their branding has been the cultural appropriation in their purchase of these bodies, which equate to fuller lips, ample asses, large winged eyes, bigger brows, tanned skin. God, the list goes on. They've acquired traits that are natural to Black, Latina, Middle Eastern women, and also to the drag world when it comes to their particular over the top aesthetic. But for women of color, having these traits for centuries doesn't come with applause, but with sexualization, racism, and objectification on a whole other level. And these traits become weaponized. For the Kardashians, though, these traits catapulted them into the top of Hollywood. Their heavily made up aesthetic has been so pervasive over the years that has come to dominate the look of social media influencers and Gen Z. That look was even dubbed the, quote, Instagram face by the New Yorker. It grows all the more complicated when we consider that these women seem to exclusively date Black men. It means something that the very first episode of Keeping Up opened with Chris saying Kim's got a little junk in her trunk, and Khloe saying Kim's always had an ass.
This family talks about sex way too much. Mom, you're not supposed to look at the camera.
One of the biggest viral moments on social media came with the 2014 Paper magazine cover that showcased that famous ass and read, "Break the internet, Kim." It kind of did because Paper's website received 15.9 million views in one day. That's compared to 25,000 on an average day. In a recent piece for Time, writer Katie Lang wrote, quote, "It valorizes curves on wealthy, racially ambiguous white women, but stigmatizes these traits on Black women. One that plays into a longtime fascination with the aesthetics of Blackness and an unwillingness to engage with the ugliness of anti-Black racism at the same time." Sarah, how is all of this something that we can justify in 2021? Is it even something that we can justify?
No, we can't justify it. I think in their heads, they don't believe that this hurts anyone. I think they're quite stubborn about that belief that it's completely innocuous what they do, but that's not true. And I think that we've been having a conversation in popular culture about racism and about fetishization for long enough that they should probably acknowledge what they're doing is problematic. So I would like them to do that. I don't know if they will, but you're absolutely right. Like, this can't be justified in 2021.
Yeah, and I think it also touches on a point you made earlier about what it means when white people become, quote, exotic versus what a woman of color actually is. And being a woman of color, this is such a difficult part of their legacy to me because I've never been stick thin. I've always struggled with body image. And as somebody who has curves, who has thicker brows, a bigger nose, all of that, it's hard not to have a bit of disdain for the family, especially and they're not ever commenting on it. And I think what I'd love is for them to gain just a little bit of media literacy after all these years, because it seems they have in every other avenue, but this feels a little bit taboo for them. And there's also the fact that they have redefined beauty standards, which now
Mhm.
finally do give women with curves a platform. And there
Yeah.
is a value to that in a way. I feel so much more confident since that show came out. And just seeing those bodies that are bodies like mine, I feel great about it in a way I never really did before. The ideal body type is no longer a blonde white woman who weighs 98 pounds, and I think that is a step forward. Marilyn Monroe kind of had that depiction in celebrity, sort of like Kim does now. But even Marilyn was not the curvy woman that she was described
Mhm.
as. She was still a pretty thin, petite lady. So I think there's something to be said for that. And here's where things do get a little complicated. These women have taken these bodies and they've been catering to them. Now, hear me out because I know that's a tough sell, but Chloe's denim company, Good American, is one of the first out there to be truly affordable, size inclusive with good material that is flattering to women who've got a little extra padding. Kylie Cosmetics and KK Beauty, Kim's line, both offer wide ranges of skin tones. They follow in the footsteps of Fenty Beauty, and Kim's shapewear line, Skims, is also incredibly body conscious, size inclusive, and popular among disabled customers. And they're all affordable. A large portion of their customers are also women of color. Sarah, how do we reconcile this with the appropriation factor?
I think that these issues are really complicated because on some levels, they are very aware of issues of racialization and discrimination. And then on some levels, they're really ignorant. So before she had as much plastic surgery and before they'd culturally appropriated as much of their looks as they have today, Kim was speaking about her body, and she's always been pretty curvy.
Yeah.
And she attributed her curves to her Armenian heritage. And she was essentially like, people are calling me fat. People are comparing me to Paris Hilton and saying that my body isn't as good as hers. Like, I'm Armenian. I'm not going to fight it. Like, I'm paraphrasing what she's saying here, but she was essentially asserting her pride in what she viewed as her Armenian look. I really related to that when I read that quote because I naturally also had a larger bust and, a larger backside. And I also kind of saw a lot of Armenian women who looked like that and thought that that might be why I looked that way. I mean, I definitely was curvier than my relatives of British descent. So I liked that she was talking about ethnicity and kind of calling people out for their racism towards her.
Right.
However, I think what Kim did there was, I think subsequently she and her siblings might have focused on the persecution they have faced without realizing that they too can persecute others and that they can discriminate against people and that they can commit cultural appropriation and that they have altered their bodies subsequently in a way that does appropriate ethnicity and is problematic and is insensitive.
100%. And I think what's also interesting is that this is where the media gets confused too. One day they're celebrating Kim's curves and then she's pregnant. And I don't know if you remember her pregnancies there, the first one with North. She was crucified in the tabloids and on social media because of the weight that she gained. And, I remember so many photos of her feet just spilling out of her shoes. And she was struggling. She had a really difficult and painful pregnancy. And I think the way she even discussed that on Keeping Up made a big difference for women who've also been through difficult pregnancies. And at the same time, she's being completely ridiculed for the way that her body had grown, which is laughable because at the same time, we're putting that same body on a pedestal and saying, this is the great new ideal. But we're also mocking her when she steps a little bit in the other direction when she is pregnant, for God's sake. It's really difficult to wrap your head around it.
Yep. So she was pregnant at the same time as Kate Middleton was. They had their first pregnancies simultaneously. And if you contrast the media coverage of Kate Middleton with the media coverage of Kim, it is a fascinating case study because Kate, who is much taller, is naturally very slim, has a pretty straight figure. I mean, they're both beautiful women, but they have very different body types. I mean, she was praised for, how she was barely showing. And in part, that was because she had a really long torso, right? Like, when you have a long torso, there's more room for the baby to grow. I remember when I was pregnant, because I'm about Kim's height, when I was 39 weeks pregnant, which was a week before I gave birth, my doctor looked at my stomach, which was so stretched out because I'm short and there wasn't room for the baby to go down. It had to go out.
Right.
He looked at me and was like, do you want to give birth early? I don't think your stomach can stretch out anymore.
Wow.
So, and I think he was joking, but I recalled Kim and how she'd been represented and everyone was so horrified by her body. But the truth is most women do not carry like Kate Middleton, who has the stereotypical body of a fashion model, right? She looks like a runway model and she barely looks pregnant until the very end. And she doesn't ever look swollen. So good for her. She's lucky. Some women don't get swollen when they're pregnant, but many do. And that's a natural part of pregnancy that isn't even for most people particularly worrying. So I liked that Kim showed us what it looked like. I was also terrified by the way we were responding to it. I mean, we did the same thing with Jessica Simpson as well when she had her first pregnancy. Like anytime a woman doesn't carry well, quote unquote carry well,
right?
Because what is carrying well? A live birth is carrying well, and like that's the goal of pregnancy. The goal of pregnancy isn't to look cute for 9 months, right? But anytime a woman doesn't look traditionally beautiful while she's pregnant, if she has pregnancy acne, or she's sweaty, or she gains more weight than the media deems acceptable, or she's swollen, we just act like it's a moral failing.
Yeah.
And Kim, who's incredibly body conscious, like, I mean, she was obsessed with losing the baby weight. And while she was pregnant, it seemed like it was really difficult for her because she was being judged for the way she looked, but it was out of her control. And I mean, that's so cruel.
It's so cruel. And I think, you put it perfectly. And I think that's what it is, that women don't get to look women have to look traditionally beautiful all the time if they're in the public eye, period, whether you're pregnant or not. But it's absurd that we don't even give them the leeway when they might be ill or they might be carrying a goddamn child. Now let's get back to the family a little bit. So they built a whole empire, one that includes fragrances, books, clothes, emojis, very good emojis, I have to say, endorsements for everything from teeth whiteners to Coca-Cola. But things reached a fever pitch in 2012 when Kim started dating none other than Kanye West at the height of his career. They married in 2014 in a castle in Italy. She wore a Givenchy dress and there was a wall of roses. I remember it. I love it. It's in my memory. It was an unparalleled spectacle, these two high-octane forces uniting. The New York Times called their marriage a historic blizzard of celebrity. And that's for countless reasons at this point. The family was as reviled as it was beloved, and by marrying the most famous Black man of the time, the controversy of cultural appropriation swirled even louder. On the other side of it, though, the couple was trailed by paparazzi. They went to every Met Gala owning the red carpet. They seemed so enraptured by each other wherever they went. He rapped about her. She adored him. Together, they had 4 kids, North, Saint, Chicago, and Sam. And with each pregnancy, it was as if another Kennedy was being born. And it was the 60s all over again. Knock on wood, because we know how that ended. Now, social media clamored to guess the wild name of their next child, but it was also debating when the relationship would meet its end. That's how divisive this all was. They made, undeniably, one of the most captivating couples in Hollywood history. And what I personally can't forget is that Vogue cover that featured the two of them with the headline #World's Most Talked About Couple. It led to thousands of complaints for the magazine and many saying they wanted to cancel their subscription, as Kim was not yet being taken seriously by the fashion industry. Now, just months later, she'd be seated next to Anna Wintour at any given fashion show. She still is, just saying. In a recent masterclass video, Anna said it would have been a, quote, misstep to ignore how influential the twosome had become as they were, quote, the conversation of the day. And this is where the divisiveness comes in, because that issue outsold covers with Beyonce and Obama on the cover. It was huge for Vogue.
Mm-hmm.
Anna did get her trademark snippiness in, of course, because she also said in that same video, quote, "If we just remain deeply tasteful and just put deeply tasteful people on the cover, it would be a rather boring magazine." Ah. And this is the thing. Kim and Kanye were often seen as outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
She even said after the 2013 Met Gala that she went home and cried because she felt so unwelcome by the elite around her. Sarah, how do we feel about Kim and Kanye trying to enter this upper echelon?
I think they knew this was going to happen, and they still felt it was worth going through. I mean, Kim, as much as she's a real person who has feelings, same thing with Kanye, real people with feelings, they're also really smart, strategic, and calculating. And I think they knew that this would be worth it, right? Sometimes you have to do unpleasant things to get where you want to go. And they got where they wanted to go. They got the cover of Vogue. They got prime seats at fashion shows subsequently. Like, they're winning, and it was worth the sacrifice.
Yeah, I think by this time, especially these two collaborating together, they knew how to play the media and use it to their advantage. But they kind of forced their way in. And I think there's really something to be said for that, because God, Vogue is a little bit of a relic at this point. And sorry, so is Anna Wintour. And I think these two kind of helped change things a little bit and take them in a fresh new direction. And I wish Vogue had kind of kept that up. Now, there were a number of turning points that finally had the world and the media swaying eventually, and just a smidge. First, there was the harrowing moment when Kim was tied up, held at gunpoint, and burgled by intruders while in her Paris apartment for Fashion Week in October 2016. They stole $10 million worth of jewelry, and somehow Kim came out of it physically unscathed, but mentally shaken. The show went on brief hiatus, but still, the tabloids questioned if it was yet another publicity stunt. In response, she filed lawsuits against several media outlets the following day and secured a gag order to get the video of her after the robbery removed from any articles. Soon after, she dropped the lawsuit, prompting more criticism that the robbery was a ploy to generate media attention. This, of course, proved to be completely absurd because there was an entire police investigation. It brings me back to the overall character study here. Kim was never able to shed the image of a vapid socialite. She's still seen that way. And that's something that's reserved for women who enjoy beauty, who speak in one way, and I don't think it's ever really been fair to her. The same was the case whenever she and her sisters spoke up about their Armenian heritage, even when she advocated for the recognition of the Armenian genocide, which led to Joe Biden eventually doing just that, even when she has spoken up consistently about the political turmoil there. It's written off as a media ploy. It's kind of unbelievable. They really kind of get no chances here. Now, Sarah, you are Armenian. You touched on this a little bit earlier. I know her advocacy there has really touched you over the years. Can you share why?
Well, she raised awareness about it. And I don't think you get a situation where the US Congress votes to acknowledge that the Armenian genocide happened without the Kardashians. I truly don't think that happens. She wrote an essay that was responding to the fact that the Wall Street Journal had published an advertisement by Armenian genocide deniers that was about why the Armenian genocide didn't happen. And historians agree that it happened. There is factual evidence. My family is Canadian because it happened. My father's family, he has great grandparents who came to Canada as refugees from the Armenian genocide, who fled. My great grandmother, her mother essentially sacrificed herself so her kids could live. She hid her children in a piece of furniture, and then her children went and found the Red Cross after the massacre was over, right? The screaming stopped, and then they went and found the Red Cross, and they came to Canada as refugees. It is still a crime to this day to talk about the Armenian genocide in Turkey and say that it happened. It's considered an insult to Turkishness. There are people who go to jail for talking about the Armenian genocide there and asserting that it happened. So it is still very radical for Armenian people to speak up. I mean, there are those who will take out an ad in the Wall Street Journal trying to say that the ethnicity that you're part of that was persecuted, their suffering didn't happen. People try to erase that. So the fact that Kim Kardashian took time out of her schedule to raise awareness about this, even though it was controversial and it still is. Like, I'm sure she received a lot of hate mail for it. A lot of people believe it's disingenuous, which must be incredibly dehumanizing and hurtful to her. Like the idea that she doesn't care about the Armenian genocide, like that she's too superficial to care about what happened to, her ethnocultural community that's just a scathing, awful, abusive thing to say to someone, right? And she called the Wall Street Journal out. She said that she doubted that they would have published an ad by 9/11 deniers or by Holocaust deniers, that it was dehumanizing to publish this ad. And it's essentially, this is me, it's putting capitalism above people's human rights, which happens all the time in this society, but it's always wrong. Anyway, I think that she did a lot to raise awareness. She also, on the show, she went to Armenia. She baptized her daughter in the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem. So she helped show people Armenian heritage, Armenian history. She really showcased it. Armenian heritage really mattered to her father, and her father was a very influential figure in her life. She has said that many times, and he was not a perfect man. He was very racist towards many people, according to certain reports. So he also, according to certain reports, has said very transphobic things. But he taught his children to be proud of their ethnicity, and he taught them about how it was persecuted, just like my father taught me about the Armenian genocide. And so this was a situation where she was very principled, and she was a very articulate, committed advocate for the Armenian community, and she's never gotten adequate credit for that. And I would just like to give her credit and say, Kim, you've done things that were wrong, but this you got really right, and I see you. And as an Armenian person, or a person with, I'm not completely Armenian, I have some Armenian heritage, but as someone with some Armenian heritage, I see you and I thank you. And, I'd like to think that if my great grandmother were alive, she would thank you too, as a refugee who came to this country.
You sharing all of that, Sarah, just gave it even more grounding to me, and I appreciate them even more now for doing that. And I'll add to that what's really spoken to me is Kim's efforts at political reform too. I know that's probably, again, winning a lot of laughs from those listening, but because it certainly has on social media over the years, but I see so much truth to it. This is her paying up. She's advocated for Chris Young, for Alice Marie Johnson, people who have faced life sentences for drug offenses. For Alice, she used her power and Kanye's quote unquote relationship, which we'll come back to get into the White House and speak with Donald Trump, the president at the time, and had Alice's sentence commuted. That's massive. She also helped persuade Donald to support the First Step Act, which enacted U.S. prison reforms and was eventually passed in the U.S. Senate. She also funded the 90 Days to Freedom campaign, which releases nonviolent drug offenders from life sentences. And so far, that's led to 17 people finding freedom. That's big. Still, she was accused of taking ownership for something she had nothing to do with via a publicity stunt. So if you're reading that so far, Kim can't win. But lawyer Brittany K. Barnett, who worked alongside Kim in a lot of these initiatives, said, quote, Kim linked arms with us to support us when foundations turned us down. We and our clients and their families have a lot of love for her and are deeply grateful for her. In my opinion, she's pulling a full-fledged Legally Blonde. And Sarah, I ask you, if we can love and praise Elle Woods, why can we not love and praise Kim Kardashian? Is growth not allowed?
I agree. She is like a real life Elle Woods. She loves makeup, she loves fashion, but she also loves social justice. I think that we should applaud this. And I also think the reason why people don't applaud this is that we live in a deeply misogynistic society that typecasts women. Either you are superficial, according to people, and you like fashion, which I still don't think is superficial, but other people do.
No.
Or you are a substantive, hardworking person. And that binary is, it's BS. But it's based on the sexist trope that women who like stereotypically feminine things can't be people of substance. And that's not true. Kim proves that. And I'm so happy she's proving people wrong by getting people out of jail, by studying for the bar. I can't wait for her to be an amazing lawyer. One of my predictions in life, and I'm not saying I would vote for her if I lived in California, but I truly believe she will run for governor of California, and I believe she will win.
Really?
I truly believe that this is what Kim Kardashian plans to do 10 or 20 years from now. Truly.
then we're going to come right back here and talk about it and rave. And I may even become an American citizen so I can give her my goddamn vote. Now, another thing that I think is so interesting about this whole period was Kanye, who we cannot not address, because during this whole time, he was going through something, to put it generously, and he was campaigning for Donald Trump, and he was going from his usual Democrat ways to very conservative viewpoints. We won't get into all of it because, God, there is so much of it. But what was interesting is that she didn't take his side, and she made it very much known that she didn't agree with what he was doing, and that she even tried to convince him otherwise. And I think it's one of the first things, and of course I can't know for sure, but that divided them. Now, so earlier this year, Kim and Kanye did file for divorce, and that, God, an end of an era, an end of a couple that defined the tabloids and taste for so many of us. I used to say that I would fall down crying and just have to take a day off, have to take a week off the day these two called it off. Listen, I was fine when the time came, because if we have learned anything, it's that Kim is better off without Kanye, and Kanye just might be better off without Kim. Now, right now, he's got a new album that's out, and she's working to become a lawyer, as we discussed, and everyone in the family seems to be thriving with their own respective brands, affairs, dramas. What's clear is that Kim is more than that sex tape ever was. She also isn't just a media puppet, but someone powerful and savvy enough to build her own empire. These people, whether we like it or not, have come to change and redefine cultures in so many ways, some for the worst, absolutely, but some for the best. And I think to truly assess their place, we have to look at the whole picture and admit our guilty pleasure, because God damn it, those Kylie lip kits are really good. I'm wearing them right now. This also brings us to our final segment, Hindsight is 2021, where we choose the one moment that we might have handled differently if we were the subject of the story.
I shouldn't have done that.
Sarah, you go first. What would you change?
They are profiting off of the same physical traits that racialized women are fetishized for and are marginalized for. So they really need to acknowledge that. They should have done that a long time ago. They should have just not done that and avoided that. But if they were going to get these plastic surgeries out of a place of ignorance, once it was pointed out to them what was happening, they really ought to have acknowledged it right away and been more open to constructive criticism than they are as a family. What about you?
Well, for me, I mean, I completely agree with you, Sarah. And if I were any one of the Kardashians, which, you know what, often I feel like I am, and I feel blessed to be, I would have spoken about all of the appropriation accusations, just like you said. You know, they're raising multiracial children. I think it's important to say something and speak up sooner rather than later. And if I were all of you out there, I'd also own up to my inability to stop watching their every move, with the wear and use of their products and fascination about what they might do next. The obsession is real, just admit it. And Kim especially has worked so hard to be where she is. The more sex tapes, the better. I'm saying it right here, right now. Enough of the slut shaming. Now, in the words of Kris Jenner, I have one parting statement.
Kim, you're doing amazing, sweetie.
And in our next episode, we'll be talking all things Whitney Houston, which is sure to get very controversial and messy. Now, if you want to hear more from me, you can find me on Twitter at _Sadaf Hassan. Sarah, where can our listeners find you?
Listeners can find me on Twitter at Sarah Sahagian. And if you liked this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe so other listeners can find us too. Thanks for listening.